Let's finish up with the last chapter, which is talking about globalization and protectionism. So there has been some concern over trading. We talked about in the last chapter how basically, you could really gain from trade whenever you are trading off of the comparative advantage because you're trading at a lower cost. So that's kind of saving your money where, you make it more expensive so you can buy it cheaper. So just as us consumers, right, we're going to buy whatever's cheaper so we can consume more since the price is lower. And so because that should be better for us. But there is some concerns. Okay. In 1970, imports and exports made up around 11% of U.S. GDP. Right about now they make about 32%. So that means, back with I think chapter 2 or 3, we were talking about globalization and how we're able to get more access to different countries, and because of that, we're able to produce, or we're able to buy more foreign goods, and they're able to buy more of our goods. So, imports and exports are going to be increasing because there's more access to them. According to the World Bank, 97% of Botswana economic activity is connected to trade. So, like the U.S., 66% of our GDP is from consumption. Well, 97% of Botswana's activity is from trade. Crazy. High-income nations perceive a competitive threat from firms in middle-income nations like Mexico, China, and South Africa because they have a lower cost of living. And since they have a lower cost of living, they have a lower wage. And if wage is lower, then the input cost is lower, so the price is lower. So that's why high-income nations, right? If we're looking at producing something, it's a higher cost versus buying it at a lower cost, right? So that's why the higher-income nations are concerned about the trading, because you're going to be buying from this middle-income nation like Mexico or China, but the firms in the U.S. are really concerned about this because you're not buying from them. Low-income nations fear that they will suffer if they must compete against more productive workers and additional technology in high-income nations. So just because, the lower-income nations don't have enough technology, they are going to be, kind of out of the game when it comes to trade. Some politicians worry that their country may become overly dependent on key imported products like oil, which in a time of war could threaten national security. The thinking here is if you got your oil from, Iran. Okay, let's just say you got all your oil from there, and then all of a sudden Iran went to war. They're more concerned with that than giving you oil. So they're going to cut you off, right? And so now, since they cut you off, you have no oil. So because you are overly dependent on a foreign country for your, product or for your good, and they cut you off, you have no option. So that's some concern that some politicians have. Okay, so that's why they argue we need to produce our own and not depend on somebody else. Because if you depend on somebody else, they're going to let you down. So you need to produce your own. That's what some people believe. Okay? So that leads us into what protectionism is. Protectionism is when a government legislates policies to reduce or block imports. These policies often seek to provide domestic producers and domestic workers from foreign competition. So basically it's like, hey, buy less foreign goods, more domestic, right? You probably heard it on the news. Hey, this was made in America, you should buy this, right? So imagine that, but the government kind of doing that. Okay? So how the government's going to basically say, hey, you should buy more American goods and less foreign goods is by having either a tax or limiting the quantity that comes in, or having some rules and regulations. And that's split up into these three forms: tariffs, import quotas, non-tariff barriers. All right. A tariff is a tax that governments impose on imported goods. This is going to make imports more expensive for consumers. So basically, just because there's a tax, it's more expensive, so you buy less. And the only reason there's a tax on it is because it's an imported good. So if the tax is higher, you buy less import goods. So the thinking here is because you're buying less import goods, you're buying more domestic goods. All right. So basically, this will raise the price of the good, and because the price is higher, your domestic firms are going to want to produce more. Law of supply, right? So in this case, prices go up because of the tariff. And so law of demand says quantity down. Law of supply says quantity up. So because you're buying less product to begin with, because your domestic firms are supplying more, this is going to decrease the imports. Okay. There are some examples of this, such as in 2018, President Trump increased tariffs on Chinese manufactured goods by 2 to 25% on goods such as TVs, monitors, all those goods. The intention behind the policy was to shelter U.S. manufacturers from competition, helping companies that operate domestically. So the thinking here was like, if the price in the U.S., so the price of the U.S. for a computer, okay, is $1,000. All right, you could buy from another country, but their price is down here. So let's say the price in the foreign country is 900. All right. So price is down here. So right here, this on the supply curve, so that point right there, that red dot, price comes in, hits the supply curve. So this is the quantity supplied. This is how much domestic production you do. If you kept going across here, you eventually hit the demand. So this is the quantity demanded. So your people are demanding so much more than what your country is supplying. So that creates a shortage. And your imports, that's what your shortage is. You're buying this much, you buy this much from your country, you buy the rest from imports. So you import the shortage. Now with a tariff, this is going to raise the price. Okay, so this is the price with the tariff. If we did the same thing, this is your quantity supplied, this is your quantity demanded. So this area right here, this blue section, got smaller. That blue section is your imports. So because of the tariff, your imports go down. So tariff up, imports down. And this is a good thing, right? Because look, you are buying more of your country's goods, but you are buying less overall goods. Like you are buying less. All right. So that is the effect of a tariff. So that's a way we're trying to basically help out our domestic firms, is by giving them a higher price to sell more. Now this is one side of the argument. Now what happens on the other side is, well, you're buying less imports. So, you know, if you're buying less imports, China, right, if you were trading with China, they would be upset because you're buying less of their goods. So what they do is they put a tariff on you, right? So if you sold something to China, China's upset with you, so they put a tariff on whatever you're trying to bring in, to where Chinese citizens are buying less of your goods. So because you made them make less goods, they're going to make you make less goods. So that is called a trade war, where you put tariffs on each other because you're upset with how they're trying to decrease their imports. Okay. The next one would be a quota. A quota is just a limit on quantity of imports. So just a limit on import quantity. How I remember this is QQ, quantity quota. The other one was T, tariff, T, tax. Okay, tax on imports, tariff. Q, limit on imported quantity. So a numerical limitation on the quantity of a product that can be imported. A non-tariff barrier is a way a nation can draw up rules, regulations, inspections, and paperwork to make it more costly or difficult to import a product. So basically, because of the rules, we're not going to import ABC. Or if you are going to sell to us, you need to meet this regulation. And because the regulations are higher, some firms are like, you know what, not going to waste my time. Okay, so I won't supply to the U.S. The World Trade Organization, also known as the WTO, is an organization that seeks to negotiate reductions in barriers to trade and to adjudicate complaints about violations of international trade policy. So basically, they're the ones that are really trying to help out trade between countries, just kind of monitor how that's going. Now, an example of a quota, in the 1970s, many developed countries, including the United States, found themselves in a decline in the textile industry. The reason this happened is because the textile production doesn't require very high-skilled labor. So basically, what happens here is that this really made a lot of low-skilled labor take over the textile production. So we were able to set up low-cost factories in developing countries. So developing countries are like those middle-income countries. So they can have a lower wage. They can produce the textiles. So in order to manage this loss of jobs and income, the developed countries established an international multi-fiber agreement that essentially divided the market for textile exports between importers and the remaining domestic producers. Okay. So basically what happened here is like we had 100 firms in the textile industry in the U.S. Because it's a low-skilled labor, all those, most of those firms went to Mexico because of the cheaper labor. So the domestic firms that stayed didn't like this. So they said, hey, government, I want to have a fair share of this market because those the firms in Mexico have a lower cost, they have a lower price, no one's going to buy from me. That's not good. So what they did was they have a quota that says, hey, if you are going to sell to the U.S., you can only sell 500 textiles. The rest could be the domestic. All right. So that's how it goes when we're talking about a quota. Is like you can only bring in a certain amount. This multi-fiber agreement did run from 1974 to 2004, and it specified the exact quota of textile imports that each developed country would expect from low-income nations. The last thing is going to be a non-tariff barrier, such as like a rules of origins regulation. These rules basically could be anything. One of them could be a made in country X label, as the one in which the last substantial change in the product took place. So basically, it's like I'm not gonna get any goods from this country. Okay, so if it said made in Thailand, we're not gonna buy it. All right. If it said made in Mexico, we would. So whatever that last substantial change in the product was, that's where it said made in. That's what we're going to import in, depending on the rules. A manufacturing company wishing to evade the import restrictions may try to change the production process so that the big last change happens in their own country. For example, certain textiles are made in the U.S., shipped to other countries, combined with textiles there to make the apparel, and then it's come back to the U.S. for the final assembly to escape paying tariffs, basically to make the made in the U.S. label. Okay? So sometimes you'll see that made in the U.S., assembled in the U.S. This is why. Okay? Trying to avoid the barriers to trade. All right. So in the next video, we'll continue on talking about globalization and protectionism. I'll see you there.